welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 436, Off the Unbeaten Path. The episode begins with the waves raging pretty wildly as Ash and the gang were traveling on the boat that they were on at the end of last episode, so they could easily cross the sea that was between them and their next destination, Metallica Island. Ash was still over the moon regarding his recent Battle Frontier win in the last episode against Lucy at the Battle Pike, so he was looking at his symbol case, admiring every single symbol he had won up to this point, including his most recent one he got from Lucy, the luck symbol. But he was happy overall with the fact that he had 4 out of the 7 symbols. Although deep down, he couldn't stop thinking about getting the other 3, as opposed to the 4 that he had already earned. Brock reminded Ash that the next battle facility, the Battle Palace, was on Metallica Island, which shouldn't have been that far from where they were now. Ash knew this, and it just got him even more excited to participate in his next frontier battle. Brock bursted Ash's bubble a little bit when he told him that they wouldn't be heading to Metallica Island first, because it was kind of out of the way, so Brock thought that they might as well stop at another island along the way to take a little break. This island being Potpourri Island, which was visible straight ahead in the distance. So Ash and the gang headed there, looking forward to what adventure they would have on this island. Unbeknownst to Ash and the gang, while their boat was approaching Potpourri Island, Team Rocket were following their boat underwater in the Magikarp submarine. Yes, it's returned again. Jessie was currently looking through the periscope while pedaling, and James and Meowth were pedaling too, with all 3 of them desperate to make sure they kept up with Ash and the gang. Soon enough, though, an argument began when James and Meowth told Jessie to do her part and continue to pedal like they were, although Jessie was kind of refusing because she was way too tired, saying that she had a rough sleep last night. But James and Meowth were annoyed by this, rebutting that they were way more tired than she was. Anyways, Ash and the gang arrive at Potpourri Island and immediately go into the Pokemon Center there. Before they went in, though, they caught something that caught their attention, especially Maze, as she looked to her left and saw a whole bunch of Pokemon in a little fenced area next to the Pokemon Center and commented on how cute they were, since they were all baby Pokemon. To be specific, there was a Igglybuff, Smoochum, Azurill, Aron, and Chikorita. There was also Nurse Joy, because she came out to greet Ash and the gang, and she did. And also took the opportunity to explain that this Pokemon Center also functioned as a nursery, which was why she was raising some baby Pokemon. Ash and the gang then introduced themselves when they suddenly hear a group of children who were walking by talking about an upcoming contest of some sort called a Pokemon Orienteering Contest, which Ash was confused by because he'd never heard of that before, and the kids left before he could get a full answer. All Ash heard the kids say about it was that they themselves were entering. So they asked Nurse Joy about the Pokemon Orienteering Contest, and she explained what it was. Basically, it would be taking place tomorrow, and it was essentially a cross-country race that the island held every year. The entire reason for its existence was to encourage teamwork between trainers and their Pokemon, because a trainer could enter with one of their Pokemon, and they would use a map and compass to find their way through some unfamiliar territory of some kind. Also, the winning team of trainer and Pokemon would get a prize, which would be a medal symbolizing Pokemon and human teamwork, and also some of Potpourri Island's famous fruit. Ash and the gang were very intrigued by this, so they asked Nurse Joy if they were allowed to enter, even if they weren't island natives, and Nurse Joy said they could, much to their delight. Especially Brock, who proceeded to do his usual flirting with Nurse Joy, only to be pulled away by Max, as usual. And Max also scolded Brock for interrupting the conversation, since Nurse Joy was still talking. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they had been spying on Ash and the gang with some binoculars from up in a tree, having arrived on the island from inside their Magikarp sub, and they had listened in on Nurse Joy's explanation of the Pokemon Orienteering Contest, and they were interested in the competition's prizes. James was interested in the idea of earning himself a medal, because it reminded him of his old bottle cap collection that had been lost, and maybe he could get a bit of it back in the form of this medal, because they kind of look similar, probably. Jessie, on the other hand, was more interested in the fruit and the idea of a good meal. So, Team Rocket officially decided that they were going to enter the Orienteering Contest, but in disguise, so no one knew that it was them. Eventually, night had arrived, and Ash and the gang were sitting at a table on the balcony outside of the room that Nurse Joy had gave them for the night in the Pokemon Center, and they were talking about which Pokemon they should enter into the contest with. Ash was the first one to decide, declaring that he was going to pick Pikachu in case he had to battle, because he believed Pikachu to be his strongest Mon right now. Me and Brock decided to both enter with their newest Pokemon in order to bond with them better, since Orienteering was supposed to bond human and Pokemon if they did well. So, May officially chose to go with Eevee, and Brock chose to go with Bonsly. Max, however, panicked for a sec, as he remembered that he had no fucking Pokemon, because he was no trainer. So he asked May if he could borrow her Munchlax just for the competition, and May agreed, wanting her brother to at least have a chance to compete, so that she could beat his ass. Max rebutted that he was going to beat May's ass, and this basically turned into an entire argument between the whole gang, filled with playful teasing of who the fuck was going to win the contest. The next morning, Ash and the gang woke up and quickly went out to the little fenced area with all the baby Pokemon, and they sent out the rest of their Pokemon, deciding to leave them in the fence by the Pokemon Center while they competed in the contest. So, Ash sent out Donphan, Grovyle, Corphish, and Swallow. Brock sent out Bonsly, Fortress, and Mushtomp, though he kept Bonsly with him. And May sent out Squirtle, Combuskin, Munchlax, and Eevee, but she kept Eevee and Munchlax with her and let Max take care of Munchlax for the time being. And the rest of the Pokemon were bidded goodbye as they started to rest in the fenced area, and Ash and the gang asked Nurse Joy for the location of the contest, and Nurse Joy gladly led them to the location, since she was actually like the announcer of the entire contest. Once all the competitors had gathered, Nurse Joy took center stage of a little outdoor gazebo-like thing and explained the rules of the competition to all the competitors, which was that they were only allowed to use a map and a compass to reach 5 distinct locations, and the first person to reach all 5 of the locations and stamp their map and then return to the gazebo by the Pokemon Center where Nurse Joy would be waiting would be the official winner. And she also displayed the prizes, being a shining gold medal and a large variety of fruit native to the island. And she then handed out a map and a compass to all of the competitors. A lot of people had entered the goddamn contest. A trainer with a male Nidoran, a trainer with a female Nidoran, a trainer with an Oddish, a trainer with a Growlithe, a trainer with a Bellsprout, a trainer with a Azumarill, Hoppip, Jumpluff, Apom, Wooper, Gligar, Sneasel, Ursaring, Remoraid, Phanpy, Magby, Larvitar, Torchic, Mudkip, Poochyena, Zigzagoon, Shuppet, and Loudred. Among the contestants was also James and Mime Jr., because, James had chose Mime Jr. as his Pokemon to enter with, and James and Mime Jr. both promised to each other that they were going to work together very well to prove that they deserved that teamwork medal, with James especially liking it because it was gold. Munchlax, who was partnered with Max, was very, very excited when it saw the massive quantity of fruit. It really wanted it, and it jumped for joy, which made Max jump for joy because he felt that if Munchlax was actually really determined to get the fruit, then maybe Munchlax would actually do him service to win in the competition. We then see Meowth disguised as a Sneasel, as well as Jessie, who had also entered the contest. And, Jessie and James were disguised, by the way, but anyways, Jessie and Meowth very much wanted to get all the fruit as well. Munchlax wasn't the only one, because Jessie and Meowth were hungry as fuck. Jessie, James, Meowth, and Mime Jr. were all so hyped that they literally had fire forming behind their backs as Nurse Joy officially declared that it was time for the contest to start, and all the competitors proceeded to dash off through the woods in the distance. Since the map contained 5 locations that had stamp marks on them, where the stamps were located, everyone decided to go to a different checkpoint first. Ash decides to go to the location that was furthest away from the finishing point, called Rainbow Falls. While Ash and Pikachu did this, Ash's friends had different ideas. May and Eevee headed off to a cliff that was overlooking the ocean. Bonsly was going ahead of Brock, much to Brock's dismay, as he was trying to tell it to conserve its energy for later. But anyways, Bonsly and Brock were deciding to head to the 300-year-old giant tree spot. Max was having a little luck in his attempt to win the competition, because even though Max was confident that Munchlax would get him the win at first, Munchlax was actually just running off aimlessly, leaving Max in the dust, forcing him to do his best to keep up. James was carefully looking at the map, trying to come up with the best route, as he and Mime Jr. decided to head to Moon Rock first, and Jessie and Meowth decided to just come up with their own strategy, not following the map at all, simply just walking in a straight line, and hoping that luck would take them to each location just purely by chance. Although, if this ended up not working, Meowth suggested that he and Jessie just scare some of the competitors and basically steal their stamps. They continued to run off down a straight line, as we see Ash and Pikachu trying to make their way to their destination, having to cross a large gap with water at the bottom by crossing a large log perched high above the fast-moving river water. They were very nervous due to how high up they were, but they were doing their absolute best, treading very lightly, but unfortunately, a light gust of wind that quickly progressed into a stronger one nearly blew Ash and Pikachu off of the log, but luckily, they managed to hang on to the bottom of the log as best they could, and they crawled basically upside down the entire way until they actually managed to make it across the log onto regular ground again. As for May and Eevee, they were crossing another part of the river by jumping across some stepping stones that were in the river, but unfortunately, May tripped, losing her footing, so she fell into the river and was dragged downstream by the powerful current, leading Eevee to jump in as well, so that it didn't get separated from May. As for Brock and Bonsly, they were continuing to their destination, the 300-year-old tree, but while Brock was checking out his compass to make sure they were going in the right direction, Brock spotted Nurse Joy running past him, accompanied by an Oddish. So Brock came to the conclusion that this Nurse Joy must have been competing in the contest, and if that were the case, then I'd wager that this was probably a different Nurse Joy, since the one from the beginning of the episode was like the aficionado of the contest, like the official, and they were waiting for the trainers to arrive, so she couldn't participate. It was probably a different Nurse Joy who decided to come to the island just for this contest. Regardless of this being a different Nurse Joy, Brock was still attracted to her, so he tried to run over to her to get her attention, and probably tried to fuck her, because he was so horny, but before he could, he was cut off by his Bonsly, who attacked him right in his chest with a powerful double edge. Since he was annoyed by Brock's stupid flirting actions, but because of this double edge, Brock was then blasting off. And ironically, Bonsly was too, because it went flying with Brock because of the force of the attack, leaving Nurse Joy confused as to what the fuck just happened, as we then cut back to James and Mime Jr., who are currently climbing up a cliff face, desiring to reach the top, where Moon Rock, a stamp location, was. As soon as they arrived, the first thing that they saw was the main attraction of the Moon Rock, basically the only thing about the sighting, which was a stone statue resembling a Lunatone. James rushes over to the statue and marks his map with the special Lunatone stamp found on the stone slab right next to Lunatone to show that he had successfully arrived at this checkpoint. James and Mime Jr. then celebrate, deciding that they were going to continue on to their next checkpoint, with James admitting that Lunatone was quite a good choice to use as a symbol out of any Pokemon out of Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn. Max was not having nearly as good a time as James and Mime Jr. because he was still chasing Munchlax around, kicking up dust in the process, but not nearly as much dust as Munchlax was kicking up, because it was running around the island aimlessly without paying any attention to the map still, because it was solely driven by the prospect of the food, and it figured that it could smell food everywhere, probably because there was food everywhere else on the island, so it was just running around everywhere just trying to get food. Although Munchlax wasn't even leading Max to any food sources, so Max wondered what the fuck's even going on. As for Jessie and Meowth, they ended up finding themselves at a cliff looking over the ocean. Meowth declared that he and Jessie were officially lost and he didn't know what the fuck to do next at this point, although he eventually just suggested that they give up on the going in the straight line strategy for sure, since it wasn't getting them anywhere, and Jessie agreed, deciding to turn back, because otherwise they'd go right off the cliff and into the ocean. Eventually, Ash and Pikachu reached their first checkpoint, a waterfall known as Rainbow Falls, and Ash and Pikachu watched in amazement as several Remoraid popped out of the water and started shooting water guns in arc shapes up in the sky, essentially creating rainbows made entirely out of water, and a beautiful view, according to Ash and Pikachu. However, Ash soon noticed that all of these different arcs of water were forming a little walkway of sorts, so Ash and Pikachu walked along it and saw a stamp slab, and Ash proceeded to stamp his map with the stamp there, noticing that it was shaped like a Remoraid, which made sense. Back with Brock and Bonsly, they had arrived at their first stamp location, the 300-year-old tree, which was way bigger than they were anticipating, as it towered meters above them. Brock and Bonsly wasted no time climbing up the tree's roots, and they reached the stamp slab, and Brock stamps his map, noticing that the stamp was shaped like a pineco, which Brock got excited by, as it brought him back memories of his fortress back when it was a pineco. Anyways, Brock decided that it was probably best he move on to his next location now, even though he was proud of the pineco stamp. And he celebrates it with Bonsly. We then see a quick cut to Max, who was starting to really fall behind Munchlax, who was still running rampant, and Max was really having trouble keeping up. But we really just cut to May and Eevee, who had finally managed to pull themselves out of the river, and the two of them quickly dried themselves off with a towel that May had in her fanny pack. May, thinking that Eevee may not know some stuff because it was just a baby, explained to it that they had managed to get out of the river because they had arrived at the place where the current wasn't as strong, but nonetheless, she apologized to Eevee for the potentially traumatic experience, almost drowning. Just then, though, May turned her head to see a cliff overlooking the ocean, the location that she and Eevee had been heading for. And this was confirmed when May saw two rocky little outcrops rising up from inside the ocean, from the ocean floor. Once May had ran up to these rocky outcrops to get a closer look and confirmed that this was indeed the location they were looking for, she stamped her map, acknowledging that the stamp was shaped like a kingler. From the stamp slab, May called Eevee, informing it that she had the stamp, and we then cut back to Jessie and Meowth, who were extremely annoyed as they had deliberately changed their strategy to not go in a straight line, but they still had ended up lost at the top of a different tall rocky outcrop from May's. Even though Meowth was frustrated, he was nowhere near as frustrated as Jessie, so he tried to calm her down, fearing what Jessie could do, suggesting that they were probably on the highest fucking point of the island now, so they could look to their map and try to cross-reference any checkpoints, since all the checkpoints should have been visible from how high up they were, but neither of them could see any checkpoints, so both of them just got even more frustrated. And Jessie getting frustrated to the point where she just wanted to fucking quit the competition at this point, and stated that they would just let James do all the work, so that if he won, he could get the medal, and they could get the fruit, which was what they each cared about. However, Meowth and Jessie feared deep down that James wouldn't share jack shit with them unless they helped him win. So they decided to do that. They were going to help James win the competition somehow. We then cut back to Max and Munchlax after Jessie and Meowth had come to this agreement. And Max was fucking surprised when he saw that Munchlax had actually finally stopped moving. So he finally caught up to Munchlax and stopped too. And Max wasted no goddamn time pulling out the map and looking for the first location that he and Munchlax should head to. Max eventually came to the conclusion that they should go to the 300-year-old tree that Brock had, unbeknownst to Max, went to already. But Max was severely disappointed to find out when he looked up from his map for the first time that the only reason why Munchlax had stopped was because he was in a deep sleep, having tired itself out from all the running. So it seemed like Max wouldn't be getting anywhere after all. We then cut back to Ash and Pikachu, who were running towards another location on the map when, much to their surprise, they fall down into a pitfall trap that was hidden and completely invisible. After the dust from the fall had cleared, Ash saw that Pikachu was almost fucking knocked out, but it was recuperating quick, and he wondered what the fuck was going on. Unbeknownst to him, this pitfall trap had been dug by Jessie and Meowth, who were watching from behind a tree nearby and laughing at their success, revealing and bragging to each other about their awesome plan to physically try and knock down all of James's competition to give James a better chance of winning. Also, Jessie and Meowth were foolishly under their disguises. I think they should have stayed in them to make themselves less suspicious if they did get caught, or at least less linked to Team Rocket, the fucking notorious criminal organization. Back with Brock and Bonsly, they were moving on to their next location with the stamp that they had to go to while Brock was examining his compass. But since Brock was so distracted looking at his compass, he ran into a hidden net that was laid as a trap by Jessie and Meowth, and Brock and Bonsly were captured inside of it, being lifted up into a tree. Jessie and Meowth laughed because they had captured yet another competitor. We then cut to Max, who was calling out for Munchlax because Munchlax had managed to get away from Max. Max doesn't find Munchlax, but he was shocked to see none other than Eevee emerge from the bushes. May is Eevee. And this made Max wonder why Eevee was separated from May, and where the fuck May was. Well, it turns out that simply May and Eevee had been separated because of the dense forest, although we see that May was really looking for Eevee, but instead she actually came across Munchlax, who was hiding in a bush and was happy to see her. And just then, Eevee, followed closely by Max, come out of the bushes, and they reunite with May and Munchlax. May scolds Max, telling him to take better care of her Munchlax, noticing that it got lost, but Max was annoyed, telling her that she should have been taking better care of her Eevee. Max then asks May how many stamps she has, and she says she only has one. She was ashamed by this, but Max was worried because he didn't have a single stamp. So he immediately grabbed hold of Munchlax, dragging him by the arm as he ran off, desperate to find one stamp location. May called after Max, trying to ask how many he had, but he didn't admit that he had 0. We then cut to Ash, who has now reached his next stamp station, the cliff overlooking the ocean that had the stamp slab on the 2 tall rocky outcrop things. So Ash quickly ran up to it and stamps the stamp slab, noting how cool the Kingler stamp looked. Yes, it was that location. So now Ash had 2 stamps, and we cut back to the Pokemon Center, where all of Ash and the gang's Pokemon that they had left there were happily playing in the fence with the other baby Pokemon. The Donphan was allowing Aron, Smoochum, and Igglybuff to use his trunk as a slide, while Marshtomp and Wooper were rolling around on the floor together. Combusting, Chikorita, Corphish, and Azurill are also playing with Corphish helping lift some of the baby Pokemon up, while Growlithe was standing guard next to the collection of fruit that would be awarded to the winner of the Orienteering competition. Meanwhile, we then cut back to James with Mime Jr. heading towards the suspension bridge stamp when Jessie and Meowth approached him, coming out from the bushes as they saw James being frustratingly reading his map, trying to figure out how to get to the suspension bridge, and they claimed that they knew a shortcut. And they pointed at this so-called shortcut being a cliff, which they escorted James to, saying that the bridge was close to the top of the cliff, and the exercise, that climbing a few hundred meters, would do James good. It was only a few hundred meters, after all. James was immensely angry at Team Rocket for even suggesting this, and stated that he may have considered climbing if it was just him, but only had Mime Jr. to look after. Meowth and Jessie claimed that they would try and help James climb up, but James denies this, and any further help from Jessie and Meowth, including shortcut advice, since he said he wanted to win fairly for once, and left, going down a different path with Mime Jr., leaving Jessie and Meowth steaming mad at the fact that James and his Mime Jr. were abandoning them. Eventually, May managed to reach her second stamp location, the Moon Rock, that was shaped like a Lunatone, and she immediately went up to the stamp slab and celebrated with Eevee as she stamped her map with the Lunatone stamp, thinking that the stamp looked pretty cool. Meanwhile, back with Ash and Pikachu, they managed to make it out of the hole that Jessie and Meowth had dug, and both of them decided to take a little lunch break, with Ash eating a sandwich on a rock, and Pikachu eating some Pokemon food. We then see Munchlax and Max too, who are also taking a lunch break, with Munchlax devouring his large helping of Pokemon food that Max had prepared that was previously made by Brock, but Munchlax wasn't satisfied, and before Max could even take one bite into his sandwich, Munchlax gobbled up the whole thing, much to Max's dismay. We then cut to May and Eevee. Well, May wasn't really eating herself, but she was just feeding Eevee some Pokemon food from her hand by the Lunatone, the rock. While Brock, who had escaped the net, was feeding Bonsly its needed milk from a bottle. Eevee and Bonsly were both very glad to have gotten some food. Meanwhile, as for Meowth and Jessie and James and Mime Jr., each of the 2 groups only had 1 cookie each. So, when it came to James and Mime Jr., James nearly just split the cookie in 2, and he gave 1 half to himself and 1 half to Mime Jr., actually insisting that Mime Jr. take 75% of the cookie because he was kind. While Jessie and James, on the other hand, were having trouble deciding who got what part of the cookie when Jessie made the final decision, splitting the cookie basically 75-25, so Jessie got 75% of it, and Meowth got 25% of it, making Meowth extremely angry. That was until Jessie stomped on Meowth to shut him the fuck up. Anyways, now that James and Mime Jr. were done their quick rest and snack break, they continued on and eventually found their next location, which was the cliff overlooking the ocean that had the 2 rocky outcrops, and James quickly went to the stamp slab and cheered with Mime Jr. as he got the Kingler stamp. We then got back to May and Eevee, who had wrapped up their break and reached a zipline, which they decided to go in order to save some time, since the next stamp was down a mountain, which the zipline was taking them down. But while they were riding down the mountain on the zipline, it actually wasn't a shortcut like they thought it would be, because they actually managed to fall into a pitfall trap dug by Jessie and Meowth, who were watching from behind a bush, laughing at their success once again. They had captured another competitor, although unbeknownst to them, Brock and Ash had escaped their traps. We then cut back to Max and Munchlax, who were finally starting to catch up to the other competitors, as they had ran past several, but now they had reached a river that they had to cross, and there was no obvious way visible, such as a bridge or anything of the sort, but as Max looked at his map, he knew he had to cross this river in order to get to his stamp destination. So he got an idea when he spotted a long bamboo stick and used it to vault him and Munchlax to the other side, which they successfully made it to, even while Munchlax was holding on to Max, and it was really heavy. Just as Max was bragging about the great skill of pole vaulting, he and Munchlax actually managed to fall into another pitfall trap dug by Jessie and Meowth, since the ground underneath them collapsed. Jessie and Meowth were watching this from some bushes and laughed at their success once again, as we cut back to May, who has now reached the suspension bridge that James initially wanted to go to, but couldn't make his way to, and while still over the moon about escaping from the pitfall trap, she noticed that there was 2 bridges, and they were separated by a stamp slab that was located on a pillar of land. So, May quickly crossed one of the bridges, making her way to the stamp slab, and got the Skarmory stamp on her map, and was celebrating with Eevee, when suddenly Max arrived, not too long after this, and spotted May. And it's revealed that off-screen, May and Max had actually collected more stamps, since when they asked each other how many stamps they both needed, May said that she only needed 1 more, which made Max a bit sad, since he and Munchlax needed 2 more, which he admitted to. May then met with Max, who was still on the bridge. She was at the stamp slab while Max was on the bridge, and they were both standing on the bridge as they both wished good luck to each other. But Jessie and Meowth, who had been watching from the side of the other bridge, saw that May and Max were distracted, talking to each other, and they used shears to cut the bridge ropes, taking the bridge out from under Max and May, causing May, Max, Eevee, and Munchlax to fall. They screamed in fear as they just barely managed to grab onto the bridge that was now lying flat against a cliff. Brock and Ash and Bonsai and Pikachu heard these screams, so they immediately rushed in May and Max's direction to help them out, while Jessie and Meowth were laughing to themselves, happy that James now had 2 less competitors to worry about, so they figured that he would have a guaranteed shot to win all the fruit for them now, since they for some reason thought that James would share the prize with them. Meowth then suggested, though, that instead of waiting for James to win, they simply just steal the fruit now, and Jessie thought this was a good idea, since Meowth and Jessie had both realized that the Pokemon Center would be empty, since Nurse Joy, the only one there, would be focused on waiting for all the competitors to arrive. So, with that, Jessie and Meowth started heading towards the Pokemon Center to steal the fruit. We then cut back to Max, May, Munchlax, and Eevee, who were hanging on to the remains of the bridge still for their dear lives, but the longer they held on, the weaker the remaining ropes on the side of the bridge they were hanging on to got. Just as they snapped, though, and May, Max, Munchlax, and Eevee were about to fall to their deaths, Ash and Brock arrived and caught the collapsing bridge and lifted it to the surface, lifting May, Max, Munchlax, and Eevee to the surface in the process. And then Max and Brock took their hands and lifted them off the bridge. Max, May, Munchlax, and Eevee thanked Brock and Ash for the help, and they all talked about how they had all been seemingly targeted and falling into traps. So they wondered if there was someone in specific that was trying to sabotage them. We then cut back to the Pokemon Center, where Ash and the gang's Pokemon were sleeping with all the baby Pokemon peacefully, when Jessie and Meowth arrived, and Jessie fired off a net at Ash and the gang's Pokemon, not because they wanted to capture them actually, but just so that they couldn't interfere with their fruit-stealing plans. Well, Jessie didn't have any intention of catching any Pokemon, as she went straight for the fruit, but Corphish, some of Ash and the gang's other Pokemon, and the baby Pokemon all stood guard, trying to stop Team Rocket from taking the fruit. Meowth, seeing the baby Pokemon, actually wanted to capture them, and stood in front of them, threatening to attack if they didn't come along. Jessie decided to help out Meowth and catch the baby Pokemon with a net, but unbeknownst to Jessie and Meowth, Swallow had actually evaded the capture due to sleeping on a perch above all the other Pokemon, so it snuck off, flying away to go find Ash and the gang to alert them to what Jessie and Meowth were doing. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, who were reunited and talking about the fact that all these traps could have been done by one person, and also Brock and Ash were making sure May and Max were injured, along with Munchlax and Eevee. Swallow suddenly arrived, having an urgent message to deliver. Ash was able to infer from Swallow that something bad was happening, while Brock was able to infer in more detail, saying that Swallow was trying to tell Ash and the gang that there was trouble at the Pokemon Center. So Ash and the gang quickly ran back there, and with Swallow's lead, they arrived very quickly and saw none other than Jessie and Meowth, which Ash and the gang had suspected, since if they were falling into traps, then maybe Team Rocket was nearby, and sure enough, Jessie and Meowth were at the Pokemon Center, with Meowth carting away all the fruit, since it was already on a cart, and Jessie holding the bag of baby Pokemon that they had stolen. Ash and the gang then confronted Team Rocket, well, Jessie and Meowth anyways, so Jessie and Meowth got distracted, reciting their motto, with Meowth going into a James disguise and filling in for James's parts, but Ash and the gang saw that Jessie and Meowth were distracted by this, so they very quietly and calmly, so as to not break Meowth and Jessie out of their motto, Brock freed the baby Pokemon from the bag, and then Ash and the gang's Pokemon from a net, while May, Max, and Ash took back the cart of fruit. Jessie and Meowth then finished their motto, and realized how foolish they were, since they were now facing Ash and the gang with all the free Pokemon, without any of the fruit or any of the baby Pokemon. In an attempt to get them all back, Jessie sent out her Dustox to fight Ash and the gang, leading Ash to call on Donphan to help him. Jessie started off the battle by having Dustox try to use a tackle on Donphan, but Donphan repelled the tackle and hit Dustox even harder with a takedown, knocking it into Jessie and Meowth, which also meant that Dustox was very injured, so Ash ordered Donphan to finish off the battle by using a Hyper Beam, and sure enough, this Hyper Beam sent Jessie and Meowth and Dustox blasting off. Although James and Mime Jr. had heard Jessie and Meowth screaming that they blasted off, and also he even heard a bit of their motto earlier. Hell, he even saw Jessie and Meowth blast off through the sky, but he just ignored them and continued to search with his mind junior for the remaining stamps, really wanting to win the orienteering contest. Eventually, we then cut back to the gazebo by the Pokemon Center, where Nurse Joy was, and all the competitors had gathered, because the day was now ending, so that meant the contest was over. And Nurse Joy officially announced that there was one person who had collected all 5 of the stamps. It was James and his mind junior, although she referred to James as Jameson, because that was his disguised name that he went under. And Nurse Joy then proudly presented James and mind junior with the Teamwork Medal, which now also had a picture of James and Mime Jr. on it, and James and Mime Jr. celebrated, with James blowing a kiss to Mime Jr. and the crowd cheering, while Jesse and Meowth showed up, back in their disguises, with Meowth in his Sneasel disguise, and Jesse smiled, telling Meowth that even after their whole evil plan was thwarted, they could at least still get their hands on the fruit, since James had been awarded the fruit as well, and they hoped that James would share it with them still. But Nurse Joy asked James if he would consider giving the food prize to Ash and the gang as consolation for them defending the Pokemon Center and the baby Pokemon. Much to Jesse and Meowth's shock and dismay, however, as James was standing on the winner's podium, he agreed with no hesitation to give Ash and the gang the fruit, saying that he only cared about the medal. Later that evening, Ash and the gang were eating some of the fruit with all of their Pokemon. Max stated that it sure was disappointing how none of them managed to win, and Ash, May, and Brock agreed at first, but then all 4 of them came to the conclusion that they at least had fun competing, and the contest was a good time, since it allowed them to spend some more time with their Pokemon. May, hearing the word contest, immediately started thinking about her next actual contest, and started talking about how she wanted to start introducing Eevee to contests, even if she just started watching them, and shit like that, and she wanted to get to one as soon as possible, reminding Max that he said that there was one nearby. Nurse Joy then stops by, having overheard what May said, and she tells May that there was a contest being held on a nearby island in Wisteria Town. Hearing this, May got extremely hyped and declared that they should get to Wisteria Town as soon as possible to participate in her next contest.